Hello and welcome to Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 94 with Brett Jutkiewicz, DP of Scream 6. Enjoy.
Have you been watching anything good recently?
Good question. I watched, kind of late to the party, watched Everything Everywhere All at Once fairly recently, which
Oh, really?
yeah, I just hadn't seen it and watched it and really loved it. It's like so much joy in that filmmaking, or you can really feel it. I mean, it's no wonder it did so well with the awards and everything. But yeah, I was kind of late to that one, but I saw that recently.
It was funny. I interviewed the DP for that, and I got it was before it came out, and they're having a special screening at the IMAX in Burbank. So I saw it and I was like, oh, I'd love to interview the DP. And the PR people were like, all right, yeah, sure. So we do the interview, and then we couldn't release the interview for like months. So when it did come out, it was already getting like a ton of attention. And the interview was me and him going like, yeah, well, I hope people like it.
Right.
I thought it was cool.
Yeah, totally. People thought it was cool.
People did think it was cool. Yeah. That does suck. I've interviewed a couple people who are like in the middle of prep or whatever, and it does sound like when you're filming, you don't really, or prepping or whatever, you don't get a ton of time to watch things. When do you find it's necessary to go back and kind of like not do anything and just ingest for a while? Because obviously you do it the opposite way. You ingest too much. You don't make everything you make is derivative or maybe too nerdy, but.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I have breaks, I try to, I think there's, it's also just, there's something nice about just really zoning out and not doing much of anything, when I'm not working. But I definitely try to keep up. I think the pandemic too is like had shifted things. Like, obviously we weren't going to movie theaters during that time, but, I was talking to the director of the movie I'm working on now about how it feels like harder to sit and watch something, heavy in a way than it did before the pandemic. And, I think now being able to go back to the theater, it's like there's, it's a little bit easier, but I think, if I'm trying to watch something at home, I don't know, it's definitely changed the way that I watch movies a bit, or how much I watch movies. Like sometimes I just want to kind of just zone out and relax. But yeah, and when I'm working, it's like, it's difficult to find any time. I get home from work and I have some food and I go to sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
Wake up and do it again. So, work a lot on the weekends too. But yeah, I try to keep up.
Yeah, over the pandemic, I went on like a Criterion buying spree. I got like every Blu-ray I could possibly want. And then the same thing, I was just kind of in a bummed out mood. So I was like, I don't know if it's a Seven Samurai kind of night. What?
Right.
You know what it is? Sure. Time for The Fugitive. I ended up watching every 90s action film. Yeah. Early 2000s action film.
Yeah, Die Hard's a good one like that. Watch that, anytime. It's great.
What kind of movies did you kind of brought you into cinematography? Because for me, it was definitely those types of movies. I wasn't really a film buff in the traditional sense.
Yeah, no, I wasn't either. I definitely, I wasn't a cinephile growing up, as a teenager by any means. I think, for me, Star Wars made a huge impression on me as a kid. That was kind of it was something that I really loved. And, I didn't really understand that people actually made movies. Like there was a whole process behind, getting what was on the screen. And so, it was, E.T., it was, Spielberg movies, Jurassic Park, like those kind of big spectacle kind of films, super imaginative movie making as a kid. That definitely gave me, that excited me, and that made me interested in watching movies in a way. And I think in high school, I started getting really into still photography. Spent like a ton of time in my high school darkroom printing black and white photographs, and skipping class to hang out in the darkroom, and so that became interesting to me. And at the same time, I was, my family had a little like my camcorder, and I would grab that to make little movies with my friends, or I don't know, like skate videos. Was into skateboarding. It was like editing them with 2 VHS decks and like, pausing one and recording it onto the other, and, that kind of thing. And so, I think that started my interest in cinematography, but at the time I didn't know it. I didn't know what I was doing really was something that people actually did as a career. And so I went to college. I actually started as a computer science major because I thought that would be a good way to have a job and, make a career and whatever, adults are supposed to do. And my first year there, I started becoming friends with some film students, and kind of realized, oh, this is, these things that I'm interested in and what I like doing maybe actually could be a career. So I took a film studies class just to kind of check it out and see what it was about, and totally fell in love, and switched and started studying film. And, in that class, it was a film history, from the beginning, from,
right.
Early, Lumiere brothers and, to the French New Wave and beyond. And so, yeah, some of those French New Wave films I remember watching, just, really opened my eyes to what film could be. I think the other film that did that for me, which I did watch as a teenager, was Kids.
Oh, geez.
When I saw that film.
Yeah, I saw that in high school.
As a 16-year-old, and realized, oh, movies can be this, like after growing up on Spielberg films, like seeing something that felt so kind of specific and small. And also, I grew up an hour outside of New York City, and, the kids were teenagers, and it was like, oh, like people, I wasn't doing the things they were doing in that film, but, I identified with their experience and realized like you could actually make a movie like that. And that was kind of eye-opening for me at the time.
Yeah, no, that movie definitely, my friend Chris Slack was definitely the smartest one out of our group. And he saw that and showed that to us. And he goes, hey, I found this film Gummo. We should all watch that. And I was like, buddy, after the last one, I'm going to let you watch that. And I was right.
Yeah. Yeah, I got that.
I feel like French New Wave is almost the skateboard films of the film industry. Very rock.
Yeah, it feels like, you definitely see that kind of freedom and energy, and kind of just like, we're just going to do our thing, and hopefully people think it's interesting, and if not, whatever. It's we think it's cool, and we think the way that we want to make this movie, let us do what we want, and at the time certainly was a big deal to make movies in that way. It kind of wasn't really done as much before then.
Do you remember? Because I don't know if it made sense, but I also came up in the same kind of like skateboard kind of world. Do you remember any of the skate films that stood out to you? Because I can think of 2 that everyone tends to mention, but.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit later, but yeah, right. Well,
yep.
Spike Jonze's that was I was almost in my 20s when that came out. I'm not sure, so it was a little bit later. Can't remember the others. There were a couple of others, but that one sticks out also just in like the filmmaking of it too. It was so different, to tie in his narrative kind of elements to escape video, which was very cool. What was the other one that you were thinking of?
Lakai's Fully Flared.
Oh yeah.
But especially with like now I'm confused. Was Fully Flared the one with the explosions in the front, or that was Yeah Right, wasn't it?
Explosions was, yeah, right. I mean, Visible Skateboard was
yeah.
Or that great Owen Wilson bit.
Yeah. I feel like Yeah Right had to have been the first skate film shot on film in earnest, because I remember a bunch of the skaters being interviewed about that, and they were like, yeah, Spike, because they knew Spike from like Jackass and stuff, and they're like, yeah, he said to just show up to this parking lot, and then there's all these pyrotechnics, and I guess the guy who got nailed in the back of the head with the 2x4, that was the first one. That was the first explosion, and everyone else just went, great, we're gonna die today, this is good, this is
yeah, crazy. I mean, they probably had a good budget to do that film, which I think that was also like interesting to see, that people were actually investing in these videos in a different way. And what else is a teenager, like some of the, you mentioned Jackass, like some of the CKY videos were always, fun and got me thinking about that kind of like combination of, I wouldn't say narrative, but weaving things into like a skateboarding video in a way.
Yeah. Well, and those films, I feel like, also highlighted like a reality that doesn't tend to, Everything Everywhere is probably a good example of the counterpoint, but movie making doesn't tend to be you and your friends getting together and making something fun. Whereas all the stuff we just said is like, that was it to a T. And then you'd be like, oh, the guy who made Being John Malkovich can do that? Well, in that case, I want to do all of that.
Right. Yeah, no, I think in the best case scenario, the films, and I've been fortunate. I feel like a lot of the films that I've done have had a little bit of that feeling of making little videos with your friends, and I think it's something that I wouldn't say I try to kind of consciously build that, but I think I hope that the experience of making the films that I make does at least touch on that feeling. Maybe I'm just like trying to recreate that feeling from my childhood in a way. But I think there's definitely on a lot of the films that I've done this, sense of friendship, sense of, family that you build, especially with the director or directors. And, hopefully that feels like you're just hanging out with interesting people and then making something cool. And it's always stressful. It's always intense, but, to, work with people that you enjoy spending time with, it's super important.
Yeah. You had mentioned, the dark room and being able to shoot. I unfortunately, when I got to high school, they had just gotten rid of a lot of programs, but the photography program was one of them. So I didn't get to experience the dark room until college. And that pissed me off because there was only so many semesters that I could fit a photo class in. Because that really is like, I always recommend that everyone, like, if you can, obviously it's hard to build one, but like go sneak into, for people local to me, like go sneak into UCLA or something and just be like, yeah, I'm a student. And just a lot of times they'll be like, oh, okay. And just let you use their darkroom, because it's really the closest thing you can get to meditation without meditating.
Yeah, I think you get to, really experience it. There's really something magical about it. Just, it's kind of a photo appears from nowhere out of the light. It's like, it's an interesting process. And, yeah, I really loved it. And when I went to college, I think we were the last class to actually cut film on a flatbed editor, physically splice the film. We were working in 16 millimeter in school, so I'm happy that I got that experience before they took that away. But yeah, all my cinematography in school was on film, was 16 millimeter in college. So I'm really happy that I got to learn that way, and then move into digital as that became more popular.
Yeah, I definitely. So I got one summer basically learning on 16 at New York Film Academy, and I still can't get away from like using a light meter or like thinking that way, or Yeah, it's something that has become are you the same guy still metering, still like thinking about it as film, even though you are shooting a different medium?
Yeah, I definitely still use my meter. I mean, I don't know. I think part of it is when the transition from film to digital started happening, you really couldn't trust the monitors. And
Right.
I feel like I've never let go of that, even though now I know really, especially if I have a DIT whose kind of job it is to make sure that the monitor looks like the movie is going to look and is calibrated and all of that. There's still something that I think just from that time where, the early digital time where it's like you're looking at a monitor, but like, is that really what it's going to look like? You don't really know. And so I think that I've kind of held over a little bit of that, just like using my meter just, as a fail safe. And I also find that, if I'm running around the set, lighting things, sometimes it's just easier for me to kind of roughen the scene using my light meter while, the crew's moving the camera, the operators with the dolly group getting the shot set up. Like I don't necessarily have to run back and forth to a monitor or always have a camera that's set up to look at the lighting. It just makes it the process a little bit quicker if I can, kind of rough things in with my light meter and then go to the monitor and be like, okay, well, we need to tweak this, and this, but we have it in the ballpark. So I use it that way as well.
I also find that it allows you to still be the magician, because now that when you set up the camera and everyone can see the monitor, now the magic's gone. But if you're just doing this all around the set and then you come back and they turn on the camera and it looks right, you're like, look, you should still pay me.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think, having a very well calibrated monitor that everybody can see certainly open, kind of take some of the magic out of what we do as cinematographers. And, if people feel like I think it's good that, in a way, certainly for the directors, that they can see the monitor and really get a sense of that's how it looks. But there is, a little bit less need to trust the cinematographer in a way because they can see it, and they, being whether it's the directors or producers or whoever is watching, can have an opinion on what it looks like, because what they're looking at is the final image, or as close to final as we can get.
Well, and you've also got whoever those people may be, maybe not the director, but anyone else who can watch the monitor always goes like, oh, this needs to be this way. And you're like, just stop, just please. Your sense of taste is not what's needed here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it happens sometimes.
Yeah, mostly for me, like commercials.
Yeah.
Trust me, we can see the thing.
Sure. Right. Yeah, for sure. But it's give and take. I think. Yeah. I do like for myself being able to feel like when I'm looking at on the monitor is accurate to what I'll be getting down the line. Especially, I'm not always available to go and do the final color grade. To be there in person. Often whether it's just kind of watching cuts of the grade and getting notes, or doing some sort of remote session if I can. But I think now and occasionally not as involved in the color process. So really being able to know that what I'm shooting on set is going to go to editorial and look close to how I want it to look when it's finished. I mean, obviously when you get into the grade, there's all sorts of little detail work and matching and all of that. But I really do try to get it as close as I can to how I want it to be, in case I'm not able to be there in post to really make sure it looks like what I think it should.
Yeah, that was actually something I'd like to talk about. What I saw you had mentioned in a different interview, and that was like, do you have consistency with your colorists, or is it a different one every time?
There's one colorist that I've used quite a bit. His name is Matt Jenks. He's based in New York. He's done probably six films for me. But it depends, often the production has a post house, that they want to work with, or the film's being colored in LA or in Toronto, or depending on where things are set up, which are, decisions that are usually made before I come on. Sometimes I'll have to work with somebody new, and I've had good experiences doing that as well. So it varies. It varies from film to film. On Scream 6, the latest one, I worked with a colorist in LA at Company 3, Mitch Paulson, who I haven't worked with before, but who was fantastic. And so, it just depends on the project, kind of where it's set up.
I don't want to jinx it, but at some point in the future, I get to interview Jill Bogdanovich. And so I'm going to have a shit ton of questions about her. Because pretty much everything she touches turns to gold.
Yeah, for sure.
But the other thing I had seen in whatever interview that was that you're a one show LUT person. Because some people are different. Some people are like, I want a different LUT for every scene, or I'm going to let the DIT, endlessly poke while we're filming. And do you kind of keep that consistency with every film, or was that specific to probably screen or black phone, whichever you were talking about at the time?
Yeah, no, that's something that's always kind of how I've done it. Part of that
stock idea.
Yeah, it's probably going back to that film stock idea, like, picking the stock, and that's the stock. I mean, obviously there's, you might shoot a film on a couple of different film stocks, but for me, I like the simplicity of that. I like to just have something that gives me kind of the general vibe that I'm going for. And then, if I need to change the look scene to scene, it's more about lighting and, color of the lights, or, how the contrast that I'm building in the lighting or not, or taking away. And yeah, I think just for me, like, everything is so complicated in terms of making a movie, shooting a movie, that if I can know that one, and that is simple and straightforward in terms of just, that's the show LUT, I think that allows me one less thing to have to worry about. But yeah, I do think it's related to just, this is our film stock. This is, this is the look in a broad sense. And then, balancing that scene to scene is more just about what we do with the lighting.
Yeah. And how do you go about generally building your show LUT? Like, what are the considerations that you're taking when you're sitting with your colors and going, oh, I want this to be that, or whatever? That's a terrible question. I want this to be that. Anyway.
Yeah, that's what I say.
Yeah.
No, kind of is. It starts kind of, usually I'll have my colorist run me through some LUTs that they already have. When I work with Nat in New York, who did the black phone, he has a bunch of, it's okay. He has like a library of LUTs that he's used or that he's developed, and so we'll kind of look through those. A lot of them I often start with film emulation LUTs that were kind of built based on different film stocks. I've just found, over the years, that those tend to feel good to me, for lack of a clearer explanation of it. There's just something in those film emulation LUTs that I'm drawn to. And so it usually starts with that and then gets into more kind of detail work. I try to keep it neutral in a way, meaning not, split toning colors or, really manipulating certain colors, because also, the footage that I usually have going into creating a LUT is just a little bit of test footage that I've managed to do and prep, and it does not represent every situation that we're going to be shooting in. So, it's really, if you get into those kind of micro adjustments in the LUT building phase, you're really only basing it on a very limited scope of environment that you'll be that you shot your tests in. So I try not to get too into the weeds on manipulating things, more about overall contrast and color in the blacks and shifting things on a broader scale. But that's kind of how it starts for me, at least.
Gotcha. And I had also seen that you built yourself, at least on, I believe, Black Phone, like a few sort of more technical versions of that show LUT where like it would force you to light brighter because the LUT was darker.
Yeah, that's true. So I do often have a couple of versions of the same LUT that are just varied in exposure, like have the base LUT and have one that's pulled down a third of a stop and half a stop. It's just, for me, sometimes if the scene is meant to be very dark, I'll put on, rather than stopping down on the camera and underexposing it more, I'll just put on the pulled down LUT half a stop, or whatever it is. So so everybody's seeing on the monitors that it's dark and moody, and that's what we're going for. But just to give myself a little bit of breathing room in post. I think now there's on the digital cameras, there's less difference, especially when you're shooting RAW, in changing the ISO, which is another way to do it, to just,
right.
If you're shooting at 800 and you want it half a stop darker, just to rate it at 640 or whatever it is. So I think, my kind of LUT pulling down is more of a holdover to when changing the ISO in the camera changed the look quite a bit. It's not as much the case now shooting RAW, but it's just, I think it's, I don't know. I like just, keeping the ISO the same and just having the DIT, switch the LUT. So
well, it also,
the way I've worked.
It also gives you the added benefit of generally just cleaner shadows, Yeah. Because if you got to light everything a half stop brighter, it won't be underexposed.
Yeah, no, that's
Simply.
true. Yeah, and you wind up, getting in the grade, and if you want to pull something out of the shadows somewhere, you have a little bit more information there, which is helpful in a lot of instances.
Yeah. On this new Scream 6, saw that you had a lot of exteriors. And I was wondering if you had any sort of, I suppose, tips on shooting night exteriors, especially in the city, but also maybe ways that someone on a smaller budget could replicate something similar, and how having said larger budget helped you either work faster or perhaps enhance the look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I spent the early part of my career shooting low budget indies in New York, and a lot of which were out on the streets at night with very little in the way of lighting. Certainly no lifts or big lights or anything like that. I think the first part is location scouting. Is if you're on a tight budget and you're shooting, obviously it's easier if you're shooting in a city and in someplace rural at night. It's kind of a whole different thing. But finding places, scouting at night, and finding places where there are existing lights that feel right for the scene and can help illuminate what you're going for. That's really where that starts. And even on a film like Scream, where we did have a bigger budget, it was still doing that, still looking at, places where that had some sort of existing light. I think the night exterior on the college campus towards the beginning of the film, right after the frat party, they leave and they're walking down this big, campus walkway. All of those lampposts that were in the scene were there, and it was part of the reason why I like the idea of staging the action there, because we had all this light, and we did wind up wrapping some diffusion around all of the light just to soften them a bit. And so I think we did that all the way down, and then we had a couple of bigger lights around, but not much really, just a little bit to help key them. And what's great about the LED lights now is you can look at what's there, and if you have a color meter, you can measure it. And
I love a color meter. Holy shit. Changed my life.
Yeah, they're crazy expensive, but they're really, they're really helpful. I have one, my gaffer Ings on our screen, he had one. And so we just, we would measure the existing lights and find out what color they were, and, decide whether we wanted to match our lights to that or do something different. But it's just super helpful in, knowing that, knowing how much green is in the green or magenta is in the light that you're dealing with on location, so you can pull that out in the camera if you want, or match your LED lights to that. But yeah, it's even on a bigger film like Scream, definitely still very conscious of picking a location that has some existing lights to work with, even in if they're just in the deep background, things that my team doesn't have to worry about lighting.
Yeah, especially with the on the color meter thing. Now that I have the ability to get XY coordinates from any source, I refuse to use lights that don't have that capability. Like, or I have to match everything to the one tube that doesn't, or whatever. But
right.
The XY coordinates make everything. So, I do a lot of corporate work and shit, and so setting up interviews, just having someone next to a window and then just mimicking, rapping, just what's the window?
Yeah.
I got it. Boop, boop, boop. Now it looks good. All right, move on.
No, it's great. It's great for that. Those interiors where you can, if you're using the natural light, just being able to see how it's reading. So, I feel so often those kind of things, but done a bunch of interviews in the past as well. And it's can never quite get the key light to match what's coming through the window. And it's so useful to be able to just measure it and do that.
Yeah. I had seen that you spent a lot of time prepping the subway scene on Scream 6 and just trying to figure out how to light Ghostface's space. But was there anything else that kind of took a lot of your attention in prep, stuff that you really had to focus on, or maybe anything that you thought you had nailed and then you got on set and you're like, wow, a little extra prep time on that would have helped?
Mm-hmm. Everything could have used extra prep time, always. It's a good question. The shrine, the theater set was definitely a big focus, and in prep there was just so much going on. So many pages took place in that set, and working out the blocking and where the characters would be, and all of that, and then the lighting for that also was a big challenge to design and figure out. And Michelle, our production designer, did a great job with her team, doing some renderings of what they imagine the space would look like once all of the art was in it, and the props and the set dressing and all of that. So that was really helpful as a starting place. But we talked also the projection in that space was something that we talked a lot about, and using that as a lighting effect as well, and another element, because it's really important for me to find a way, because we were spending so much time in that space, to at some point give it a different look, so it wasn't the same the whole time, and the projection really gave us that opportunity to kind of change things. We rigged lights above the projection screen that flickered to mimic the light coming from the screen. So when we had that light as a source, all of the lights above the Ghostface robes on stage, were spotlit with Licos from above, and positioning that and getting the color right and all of that. It was just a lot of prep went into creating that space, and just making sure that really we were lighting the environment. We had We had a blue light in the main space to help the ambience in there. I think we wound up turning that off when we switched to the projection look, but wanted to be able to move freely in that space as well, and not have to, to really let characters move and let ghost space move. So that was a big part of those discussions. So that was something that took a lot of work and prep and a lot of figuring out.
Yeah. It feels like 360 or at least 270 lighting seems to be the default now with almost everyone that I've interviewed.
Yeah, I think it's nice to be able to light a space and then just bring little things in here and there for closer work, and when possible. It's always a trade-off because especially in a movie like Scream, where you want to keep it moody and dark and not kind of flatten everything out in the lighting. So it's a little bit of a dance, but generally, try to light spaces and especially with the LEDs now, being able to adjust or turn things off quickly, really helps if there's something.
The iPad is a godsend.
Yeah, the iPad is great, and we had a really great board operator on this as well, which was helpful. But yeah, just being able to get everything in there and just turn things off as needed, or bring smaller units in for closer work it's how I try to start, at least if I can, as much as I can.
Were you hesitant to jump to LEDs? Because I know a lot of the older DPs I've talked to have said that they still wish that they could just be all tungsten all the time. But obviously that slows you down and you don't have as much flexibility, but especially the earlier LEDs, but even something like sky panels, low key, aren't that accurate. Well, accurate, yes. The spectral output. See, this is why they shouldn't have given me a color reader. Spectral output, not as good as, for instance, the Kino LEDs or certain other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing really like what a tungsten light on skin looks like. It's just so beautiful, and certainly the earlier days of LEDs were tough, and a lot of them were gross and had limited control and were kind of frustrating to use. I think now they've, I wouldn't say that they've been able to replicate, the feel of a tungsten light, but for me, it's gotten close enough that the trade-off of the flexibility of the LED light and the ease of changing color is worth it for me. To have a light that's not quite as pretty on skin as a tungsten light is, but is close enough for me to make that trade-off worth it. And it's quite a trade-off. I mean, the difference between being able to dim and change the color on the board of an LED light versus scrimming or dimming, but then the color changes on the tungsten light if you're dimming it and gelling it. It's a huge advantage to be able to do all that stuff on the fly with the LED lights.
Yeah. Do you think the difference, this is kind of just a nerd question, but do you think the difference, like if we were to be able to make an LED that had a similar enough spectral output, do you think the difference is just the power that you could get out of like a small tungsten unit that was kind of able to penetrate the skin of your actor? Because like LED tends to just kind of sit, it feels like face paint almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the LEDs are definitely better in the tubes and the sky panels in terms of the kind of softer light. I think what they're really lacking now for me is like a good LED Fresnel. I mean, I think the RE L7s they're okay, but they're big and heavy, and they have
the Orbiter.
No, I'm talking about the L5, L7s.
Okay.
The Fresnel, right? LC7, L7,
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. They're okay. They're not as punchy as a tungsten Fresnel. The Orbiter I've used a little bit. and like it, but it's big. It's heavy and takes up a lot of space. And so for me, it's the Fresnels and Lecos too. I haven't found. I think there's a Leco attachment for the orbiter potentially, but I haven't used it. But I'm curious about it. But again, it's so big, and Lecos I love to use to bounce. Just create a slash of light bouncing somewhere off a card, off the wall, off the floor. Just I'd love if there was an LED Leco that the color was good and the form factor was the same as a tungsten Leco, but I haven't found it yet. So I think generally the LED does better with the softer light.
Yeah, we should hit up like Hive, because I think I was able to play with the orbiter Leco attachment, but you're right, the orbiter is the size of a small bus, and then the Leco attachment looks like a Subway sandwich, and you just get this ridiculous setup.
Yeah. No, I've used the Hive 575, which is I think their brightest one. It's pretty cool. But I think the Leco attachment just eats so much light. But I have used the 575 with like a soft box on it, and I like that. That kind of single point source is nice for some things.
Hive made here in LA, everyone. You had mentioned your production designer, and something I love talking about on this podcast is just the interplay between the DP and the production designer. Because I've said a million times, a lot of times DP gets credit for what the production designer did. Classic example I've used 1,000 times is like every time David Fincher makes a movie, they're like, "Oh, I love the color grade." I'm like, that is a green wall. That's not
right.
That wasn't done in the grade. That wasn't done in camera. So talk to me about your how you worked with your production designer on Scream and kind of your guys' working relationship.
Yeah, Michelle was great. I mean, I think early on we had, I had put together some reference imagery, and she had some, of course, and we kind of shared, what we had and talked about kind of the broad strokes. And then we both got super busy doing our own thing. We would check in all the time, and she would come to me with an idea, or I would come to her with an idea. It was very kind of collaborative and fluid like that. But, it wasn't something that we were, I think luckily her eye was so great and her team was great, and we were really on the same page that there wasn't much that she presented to me as an idea that felt, off base or felt like didn't work for what I was going for. So it was great. It was great working with her, but I find in general, I definitely hear, whether it's in other articles or other cinematographers talking about, really kind of involved collaboration with the production designer, and to me, it's, I think on Scream was lucky that we were kind of on the same page from the beginning, and we checked in here and there throughout prep, but it really wasn't something that we were sitting, and really developing ideas together, or anything like that. But it's definitely an important collaboration where we were always checking in with each other on things, but and prep is so crazy that it's like the time just goes. I spend so much time shot listing and scouting and working with the directors that it was, my relationship with Michelle was more just, checking in on things as we were going.
How much time did you have on prep for this film?
I think I had 5 weeks.
No, that's not too bad. I'm sure it's kind of fast as hell, but
yeah, it's about the usual for the films that I do and to scale a bit.
Yeah. How much compared to something like Black Phone? How much time did you have on Black Phone?
I think I had 5 weeks on Black Phone also.
Oh, okay, cool. Were you? It was because that's a more constrained film. Did that 5 weeks go further? Because you had like less scouting. Obviously, it's mostly in a basement or whatever. Or did it kind of feel exactly the same?
Interesting question. I think it always feels like not enough time. It feels like, it's weird because it feels like not enough time, but by the end of it, I just want to get on set and start shooting, because you can talk about these things ad nauseum, for forever. And at a certain point, it's like, we have our plan in place. We're gonna do it, and if it's not exactly what we thought it was, we're gonna figure it out. And so it's kind of a mix of both. It's like I always want more time, but then at the same time, at a certain point, it's like, cool, let's just get on set and we'll start making this movie and adjusting as we go, and figuring things out as we see them in the camera. But I think similar in terms of how prep felt between the two movies, it was it was fairly similar. I didn't feel like I had much more time on the black phone than on screen.
Yeah. What are some kind of considerations that happen on a bigger film in prep than maybe on an indie or a smaller film? Things that kind of maybe jump out to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think certainly if you're lighting a big set on the stage, that's something very, very different than doing an indie film in your own location. When, on the bigger films, you generally have a rigging crew, which is a whole different, set of people who are going to put things in advance, put lights where you want them, whether it's building that on the stage or doing that on a location before you get there. So I think the main difference that I've found in the bigger films is in the lighting, and in having to really imagine what it's going to look like and position your light without seeing them, working in advance. I don't know if that makes sense. Kind of a weird way to say it. But on a smaller film, you have your lighting package. You show up to the location on the day you're going to shoot, and you figure out where you want to put the lights, and you shoot the scene. And on a bigger film, you have to figure out where you want to put your lights before you're standing in a room with the camera and the director. And there's room to adjust, and on the bigger sets, like the subway set, we'll have a day to go in, a pre-light day to go in and look at it. But even that, there's what's intimidating about that, or as done, is some of these rigs are so big that if you go in there on the day, your pre-light day, and you're like, like this really doesn't look like how I thought it was going to look, there's like almost no going back. So I think that's right. For me, like the biggest difference is having to light, commit to where the lights are going to be in advance, and on a lot of occasions knowing that you're not going to be able to make big changes to that once you're there with the camera, because you won't have time. So that's kind of a big difference for me.
Yeah, it's got to be that's where experience definitely comes in. You can't teach pre-visualization of lights to that degree. Like knowing what it's going to look like. You could explain what it's going to look like, but you won't know unless you've done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was listening to or read something about Roger Deakins that he had to, go in and argue with the line producer to get a pre-light day on one of his sets. And I think the line, I'm paraphrasing, but the line producer said something like, well, it's your job to know what it's going to look like. Why do you need a pre-light day? Because, that's your job to know if you put the lights there, it's going to look like you want it to look. And that made me feel a little bit like, okay, well, if Roger needs a pre-light day, like, I think it's okay that that I also feel like I need a pre-light day on these bigger sets. But yeah, it's certainly experience. And I think if you're kind of making that transition from, the smaller independent films into a bigger film, if the budget allows, like put more lights in there than you need, because you can always turn them off, but you can't, bring in the scissor lift to hang them, and wire them and cable them and, all of that on the day. So it's better, better to overdo it and turn things off than to underdo it, for sure.
Yeah. I also imagine that line producer, like, what, you'd rather almost have a reshoot day when we get there and it's all fucked up because we didn't have the pre-light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I know. It's a weird argument, but
money people think about money, which is fine. That's their job. I did want to touch on, because you shot 2 episodes of the most recent Stranger Things, which was a 6 series. I enjoyed it a lot. And your shot of Max going up into the sky, probably the most used promo shot in the entire series, which is very cool. Kudos to you. But I was wondering, I got to interview Tim Ives way years ago. This podcast's been going for 3 years now. So I guess way is the wrong word. But anyway, but I wanted to know, he shot most of his season. It sounded like you worked with a lot of different, within a lot of different teams. And I was kind of wondering what that experience was like for you, jumping into a kind of a moving train, especially on such an anticipated series like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was intimidating. So, I came in about halfway through the season to replace McMillan, who had to leave for scheduling reasons. And I think of how much I had maybe like 5 weeks of prep to get oriented, but they were in full swing. And, they had some COVID delays, so the schedule was really complicated to fit everything in the time that we had. But I will say that the team there was amazing, and really felt like a family making that show, and everybody was, everybody felt so kind of invested creatively, and I think the Duffer Brothers really set that tone for the season and for the series. But it was, we had some really complex, like logistically complex sets, and it was an intimidating, place to walk into and be, the new guy coming in with the crew that's, all been working together for all this time. But I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. Trust me, I got 2 that I'm waiting to go.
I'll explain out here. Sorry. Yeah, so it was, overall it was a great experience, and working with Sean Levy, who directed episode 4, which is the Max in the cemetery. He was fantastic. And I think, at the time, nobody knew that episode would become what it became, but there was something definitely special about what was going on there, and the kids and Sweetie's performance. And, so there was, it felt special, but, couldn't have known that, that episode was going to be, such a cultural touchstone. But I'm happy that it was. And I loved Kate Bush already, so I'm glad that people,
I was about to say,
people, got introduced to her music and
restarted her career. That song is still on the radio out here. At least once a day if we get a quick little running up that hill. So were they handing you like a lookbook, or were you seeing other DPs shots, or were they showing you dailies or anything, or were you kind of given a little more carte blanche?
Yeah, I had access to all the dailies that have been access to watch. And, so I was able to look at what they had already shot, which was important, because we were not shooting in an order at all. And so a big challenge for the show was, knowing how things were going to fit together, and knowing where what I was shooting was going to match with something that has already been shot, or, what it's cutting into or what it's coming from. so that was helpful. And, I went back and I rewatched the first 3 seasons, but, what was great about it was that, I think that show had such a style and the visuals of that show are kind of like baked into the DNA, which is really something that came from the Duffer Brothers from the beginning. But so I think I went into photographing it, knowing the style of the show based on what had come before. But I really never, there was really never a situation where I, suggested something or I framed something up and somebody was like, oh, that's not really how that's not how we do it on Stranger Things, or that's not really like the style of the show. That never happened at all. So it was nice to feel like, I knew what the sandbox was in general, but I was able to put my own kind of creative suggestions into it and shoot things the way that I felt like I wanted to. I never found myself feeling like I was doing something that maybe, didn't feel right to me because that was the way that the show did it. So I think again speaks to the Duffer Brothers and Sean, in their direction and their kind of openness to embrace creative collaboration.
Yeah. Were there ever times where you were able to like lean on your gaffers or anyone and be like, hey, what were you guys doing on this last episode?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of the sets that I was working in had already been lit and used before. So there was a lot of, collaboration with the gaffer to know how they had been doing it already. And some of that I knew from watching the dailies, but it's not, it was very helpful to have the gaffer that was, had already been working on these sets and knew how they had been lighting, previous to me coming on. But a lot of my work, was in Albuquerque, which was, all of the desert California, Nevada stuff that's in the season. And that was something that was, I was a DP for all of that work, and that was a whole different kind of unit of work. So that really was starting from scratch and being able to define the look of that area, that location in the show.
Sure. That actually, you're right. I was going to ask about gotta let you go here in a second. But speaking of matching, I had seen in another interview you'd done talking about doing in the new Scream, there's like a scene where someone's on a ladder going from building to building. You said you shot half that practically on set and then the other half on a stage. And I was wondering if you could share any tips on how to prepare for shooting, two things separate like that, and how to get them to match well without having to lean too hard into the DI or in the edit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, first of all, it's shot listing and or storyboarding, things just to know what your angles are, and then you're dividing that to what can be done on stage and on location. For us in that sequence, it was, anything wide looking up or anything from above looking down was done on location, and then all of the close-up work was done on the stage. So once kind of we had that, we knew what the division was, and I think we storyboarded that sequence as well, which was, helpful just to know exactly where we needed to look and what we needed to get. And in terms of lighting, on the location, I had the art department install porch balcony lights. There's a row of balconies in the back of the building, and there was no light there at all. I mean, that alleyway was a black hole essentially. I mean, there was not much going on there. So I had them. Luckily, we got permission to put those lights in all the way up. So I knew we needed some motivating source for the light. So for our stage work. So once we established that, then it allowed me to bring in that key light from that side of the building on stage to match that. And then, I think the matching the lighting. We had control in both places of our lights. So we were able to match the color temperatures, and that's something I was paying attention to. And in that case, needing to know what, because there were people living in the building, obviously, that we were shooting outside of, making sure people could keep their lights off in their windows, or we could put something inside the window, and just making sure that we had control over all of the windows that we would see again on stage. So we didn't get into a situation where somebody, left their light on in our wide exterior location shot, and then, we got to stage and whatever, we didn't have it, or vice versa. So little things like that, just, making sure the windows matched. And was another thing that we talked about as well, quite a bit.
Yeah. Actually, that makes me think of two things. One, do you just go to the entire building and go, we're filming Scream, please be gentle, like, let us work? Or do you have to be like, we're shooting Black Blanket 5, please don't tell anyone, and it's a movie?
Yeah, I would assume, I wasn't in charge of it, but I would assume that we did not tell them. We told them we were filming a movie, but I don't think we told them what the name of it was.
Yeah.
I think in general, that's kind of how we operated throughout the movie.
I just imagine that it, in some ways, it'd probably be easier to get people to play ball if you're like, no, this is the 8th Star Wars. Keep your mouth shut and please let us do what we want. They're like, oh yeah, But in terms of matching, I guess the thing that I'm kind of curious about is there's so many unknowns when you're in nature. Like maybe not even a night exterior. Maybe that's a little easier, but it's certainly outside. There's environmental lighting. There's scattering, whatever. Do you find that is something you often have to consider when matching, or is it, or how do you work with that?
Yeah, I think because it was at night in this case, and because there really wasn't much light there to begin with, we were able to control that a little bit more. And we shot but it's certainly a consideration when we shot the real location first, which was, I think, good. So we, in case there was any of those variables that we weren't, expecting, then we knew that we could replicate them then later on the stage. So I think doing that, probably depends on the situation, but doing that in that order is always good, because there, like you said, there are variables on location that, you won't know until you get there. And so being able to shoot that side of it first and then match the stage work to that, I think is helpful in general, and was helpful in this case. But yeah, something like a day exterior, maybe even more so, or a day interior, depending. But yeah, with the sun and the clouds, and being able to see what you get there and match that when you have the control to do it, always probably better.
Yeah, I'm also imagining like a thin layer of fog that you didn't realize you were working in, and then you get to the stage and it's just like the contrast is way different. You're like, oh shit, do we have a hazer?
Yeah.
Well, we got to let you go here soon, but I do ask the same two questions of everyone, and thankfully you shot a movie. I've interviewed way too many TV people where this question doesn't quite work. But if you were to program a double feature of Scream 6 and another film, what would that other film be? And I'm going to place a restriction on you, which I normally don't do, and that is no other Scream film.
Yeah. Scream 6. Another film. To be self-promoting about it, I would say Ready or Not, because okay. I think it'd be fun to watch those two films, both of which I shot, but also the same directors, and just to see, that was my first film with them, and this is my third, and I think it would be a fun pairing to watch them together.
That's a great answer. Second question. A lot of people go, oh, what's the best piece of advice you got? I think that's a bad question, because it's always, stick to it. What's the worst piece of advice you've ever gotten or seen someone give?
That's an interesting question. Not sure that I'm sure I've gotten bad advice, but I'd have to think about what it is.
This one usually takes a second.
Yeah, it's a good question. Man, there's like little things like about, always have the key light, off the, non-camera side, which I feel like is a general thing. It's not really, or it shouldn't be a rule, but, bad advice. And I'm sure I've heard some or had some, but I really can't.
You can,
I can't think of anything.
You can email it to me later. I'll voice it.
I'm sure I'll think of something as soon as I'm off the call.
No, that actually, to your point about the whole like far side key thing, I was just talking to, or no, sorry, I wasn't talking to anyone. I hate watch YouTube sometimes. And so I'll just watch it like, that's you idiot, But there's one person had like a good point, which was like all the Instagram photography or TikTok photography all looks the same because the algorithm is showing the algorithm decides like, oh, this one got a lot of engagement. So it shows it to everyone else. And then everyone replicates that because that's where they're getting their education as young creators. And so stuff like, the Black Pro Mist, I've definitely rallied against. Far side key being like the rule. All these rules that are being built that are really just like, yeah, it's a shortcut to a nice looking image, but it's not always relevant. All these lessons come in a vacuum. All this advice, 3-point lighting is a good vacuum thing. Yes, that's the framework, but it's not always correct. It's just the very basic thing. But people do tend to take it as rules, which then makes it bad advice.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some experiences where, and I certainly use a lot of far side key. I think it's a nice way to keep things feeling moody, but still be able to see in a lot of situations. But, I had a couple of experiences where it wasn't possible or got into coverage and something, changed and it didn't make any sense based on, the practicals in the room to be lighting them from the far side. And a few times really just was like pleasantly surprised. And remember I was filming this movie called The Preppy Connection years ago, and there was this scene where it's like a love scene in bed, and my first thought was, okay, well, let's like make it moody, let's put the key kind of from behind them and wrapping around, there'll be like a little silhouette. And we got there and there's practical lamp on the near side and turned it on, kind of looked at it and I was like, oh no, this is better. This is, it's like, I like that it's this kind of intimate scene and it's a little bit brighter and it's warm, but it just kind of worked better. So I think there's definitely something to keeping your mind open when, about things like that and not relying on rules or
convention,
what might, or even your first instinct in a way. I think it's good to sometimes be like, okay, this is my first instinct, but is there something else here? Is there a different way to do it that maybe fits the mood or the story better?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've said a million times on this show is like, oftentimes what is technically correct isn't correct because what feels correct is better. And especially in the kind of modern technological age where we have a lot of like calculator answer. Ooh, that's a good, I just came up with that calculator answer, where it's like you put it in the computer and it says this is correct. Calculators don't feel, although you can't feel 2 + 2 = 5. Let's not get crazy, but I'll work on that analogy. But yeah, point being, it's like a lot of times we don't go with our what feels emotionally correct. Like even sometimes not matching, jumping the line or whatever. Sometimes that actually emotionally feels correct, but in a film school class you would get in trouble for.
Yeah, I think made me think of maybe a little bit of bad advice. Probably at some point, earlier on in my career, maybe had a script supervisor get, be really insistent about that the singles and revert, or the shot and reverse shot were not the exact same size in terms of like framing size.
Okay.
I think that the rule, or for lack of a better word, is that when you shoot one person, you pick your size, and then when you turn around and you shoot the other person, it's then that you match the size, you match the distance from the camera to the subject. So when you're cutting back and forth, it's like exactly the same. And I've always found that I never liked it. I've always found it not distracting at all if one's, maybe one side you want to be just a little bit tighter on somebody because of what they're saying or what they're going through, and you don't need to be as tight on the other side. And for me, that kind of, that like precision, like, oh, it's gotta, the audience isn't going to know what to think if you're here on one side and you're here on the other side, so that's something that I feel like I disregard in a way, and that people are going to be thrown if your shot reverse isn't exactly the same size.
Well, and not only that, but with the idea of like feeling like your frame size is going to elicit a different emotional response in the audience. If there's a power imbalance in that shot reverse shot, you should maybe represent that in the frame sizing and the frame placement. They're not.
Yeah.
Conversation is rarely 1-to-1 unless it's that scene from Heat.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. That's just being, based on kind of what feels right for that character in the moment.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you go, but thank you so much for talking to me. Congrats on the past fucking 4 movies you've made. They've all been fantastic. And
I appreciate that.
When you're done with the one you're working on, please come back and we can chat about that.
Love to. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Later, brother.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F at our Mapbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.